I was just trying to grill by my ranch pond when Karen called the cops on me. That's how it started. You'd think a man honoring his late father with a simple barbecue on his own land wouldn't lead to flashing lights and HOA chaos. But if you've ever dealt with people like Karen and her crew, you know exactly how fast things can spiral. That morning, I woke up before dawn, the air cool and still, the sky just starting to lighten over the hills. I could almost hear my dad's voice telling me, "Maverick, don't let them push you off this land, ever." His words felt like a promise I needed to keep. So I did what he would have done. I rolled my old grill down to the edge of the pond, set up the folding chair, and laid a couple of thick steaks on the hot grates. The sizzle, that smell of smoke, the warmth of the rising sun, it felt like he was right there with me. And for a few minutes, everything was perfect, until I heard her, "You can't have that here." The piece shattered like glass. I turned around, and there she was, Karen, storming toward me with her sunglasses glinting, and a thick folder clutched in her hands like she was about to issue a royal decree. And trailing behind her was Marcus Webb, the HOA vice president, with his slick hair and cheap cologne that hit you before he even spoke. His arms were crossed, and there was that smirk on his face, like he was enjoying the show already. Karen didn't even say hello. She went straight into a rant about community ordinances and fire hazards and encroaching on HOA land. She waved her papers like they were law, jabbing them toward my face, demanding that I put out my grill and leave immediately. But I wasn't on their land, I was on my land. Land my father had worked for, paid for, protected. I tried to explain calmly, "Ma'am, you're mistaken. This is private property." She sneered, "Not according to our maps." Then, before I could get another word in, she pulled out her phone, dialing 911 right there, pacing in front of my pond while telling the dispatcher there was an unauthorized fire, and a trespasser refusing to leave HOA property. I stood there, flipping my steak, listening to her words hang heavy in the morning air, trying to keep my hands from shaking out of pure anger, because this wasn't just about a barbecue anymore. It was about control. It was about them thinking they could walk onto my land and tell me what I could and couldn't do. As I stood there, trying to hold on to my dad's voice telling me to stay calm, Marcus stepped forward. His eyes were cold, his smirk gone, replaced by something darker. "You don't want to take this to court, Maverick," he said softly so Karen wouldn't hear. I looked him dead in the eyes and asked, "Why's that?" He just smiled, and it was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Red and blue lights flashed across the pond as a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, slow and heavy, like it was rolling up on a crime scene. Karen ran toward them, waving her arms, talking so fast you could barely catch a word. She pointed at me, at the grill, at the pond, at the sky, like the very air was evidence against me. The deputy stepped out, adjusting his belt, eyes scanning the scene. He looked tired, like he'd rather be anywhere else. But he walked over to me with that careful cop look that says, "Let's see how bad this is going to get." "Morning, sir," he said. "We got a call about an unauthorized fire on HOA property. Mind telling me what's going on?" I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on a rag, and met his eyes. "I'm grilling on my land for my dad." He nodded slowly, looking over at Karen, who was practically vibrating with anticipation, holding out her papers with shaky hands. The deputy glanced at them, his brow furrowing, then looked back at me. "Do you have any proof this is your property, sir?" he asked. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I do." I pulled out my phone, opened my GPS app, and dropped a pin right where I stood. Then I pulled up the county's GIS map with the official property lines, downloaded and ready, just like my dad taught me. "Look here," I said, pointing to the map. "This pond, this land, it's mine." The deputy leaned in, studying the map, comparing it to the papers Karen was shoving at him. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "where did you get your property lines?" Karen's lips quivered. She glanced back at Marcus, who was standing there, arms crossed, eyes calculating. "We have the HOA maps," Karen snapped. The deputy shook his head slightly. "Ma'am, HOA maps don't override county records." Karen's face turned red, then pale, then red again. But Marcus, he didn't flinch. He stepped forward and said, We'll have our attorney contact you. We're not done here." I felt the anger boil in my chest. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Neither am I." Because in that moment I realized something wasn't right. Why were they so eager to claim this land? Why threaten me over a barbecue? What were they hiding? I walked over to my truck, popped open the weatherproof lockbox my dad had bolted to the bed, and pulled out the deeds, tax receipts, and surveys, everything proving that pond and the land around it were mine. The deputy looked through them carefully, flipping pages while Karen hovered, trying to peek over his shoulder. Finally, he looked up, closed the folder, and handed it back to me. "Sir, you're well within your rights. You can continue your barbecue." Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, unless you have evidence that overrides county property records, you're trespassing on his land." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus, who clenched his jaw so hard I could see the muscle twitch in his cheek. The deputy gave them a final nod, then turned to me. "Enjoy your meal, sir." I watched as Karen and Marcus turned and walked back up the path, their perfect posture slumping just a little, their whispers sharp in the quiet morning air. As I flipped my steak again, letting the juices sizzle and pop, I knew this wasn't over. Because the look Marcus gave me before he left wasn't defeat. It was a warning. They were hiding something, and now it was personal. They tried to embarrass me, tried to bully me, tried to push me off land my father left for me. But they didn't realize who they were messing with. I wasn't going to let them take a single inch. They wanted a fight over a barbecue. They were about to get a war. After Karen and Marcus left that morning, I thought it was over. I thought they'd crawl back to their little HOA office, lick their wounds, and leave me to honor my dad in peace. I should have known better, because the next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my gate. "Cease unauthorized use of HOA property immediately." It was signed, stamped, and dated by Karen herself. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the trash, and went about my day, but the notices kept coming. Next, it was a fine, $500 for illegal open flame near protected wetland. Then another for unauthorized structure, my grill. Then another for unauthorized occupation, me, on my own land. Each fine came with a threat of lien. I could almost see Marcus's smug grin behind every notice. They were testing me, pushing me, waiting for me to break, but they didn't know me. I didn't spend my childhood working this land with my dad to let a couple of HOA bullies take it away with paper threats. Still, it got to me. Every time I opened the mailbox, it was there. A reminder that they weren't letting this go. And every time I went down to the pond, I felt eyes on me. Karen's SUV parked across the road. Marcus's truck idling by the fence line. Phone cameras poking out windows, documenting me, watching, waiting. The final straw came one Friday evening. I was sitting by the pond, watching the sunset, letting the orange and pink skies calm the storm brewing inside me. That's when I heard the engine. Karen's SUV pulled up, followed by Marcus's truck. They stepped out, Karen in that same red blouse, folder in hand, and Marcus in a black polo, arms crossed, jaw tight. They walked right up to me. Karen didn't even say hello. She held out a paper. "This is your final warning, Maverick. Vacate the premises or we will initiate legal action." I stood up slowly, taking the paper from her, reading the bold letters claiming I was trespassing on HOA land. I looked her dead in the eyes. "This is my land." Marcus smirked, not for long. And that's when I saw it, in his hand, a folded map. I grabbed it before he could pull it back. "What's this?" I demanded. His eyes flickered, a moment of fear before the smirk returned. "Nothing you need to worry about." But I opened it anyway, and there it was, lines drawn across my property, lines that didn't match the county records. Lines that cut through the pond, through the oak tree, through the fields my dad and I worked every season. Fake lines, and in the corner a stamp, HOA property survey. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were trying to steal my land, bit by bit, paper by paper, lie by lie. Karen snatched the map back, but it was too late. I had seen it. I knew now that this wasn't about a barbecue or a grill or a fire hazard. This was about control, about power, about greed. They wanted my land and they were willing to break the law to get it. I looked at Karen. You messed with the wrong man. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see. They turned and walked back to their vehicles, but I stood there, the paper shaking in my hand, my dad's voice echoing in my mind. Don't let them push you off this land. That night I didn't sleep. I pulled out every deed, every tax record, every survey my dad had ever kept. I laid them out on the kitchen table, comparing them to the county's online records, tracing every line, every marker, every measurement, and I found it. A tiny discrepancy. A single marker near the back fence, mislabeled in the county's digital records, but correct in the paper survey my dad kept. It was small, insignificant to anyone else, but to me it was everything, because it proved the boundaries. It proved the pond was mine. It proved Karen and Marcus were lying. I spent the next day driving to the county recorder's office, getting copies of official maps, affidavits, everything I needed. I talked to an old friend of my dad's, a retired surveyor, who agreed to come out and re-survey the property. And when he did, the truth was clear. Karen's HOA had been using my land, the trails, the fishing dock, even part of their so-called community park, for years. They'd built it on my land, and they had no idea. I sat on that revelation for a moment, letting it sink in. They had called the cops on me for grilling on my own property while they were illegally using my land for their HOA precious amenities. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Lisa who didn't flinch when I laid it all out. She smiled. Oh, they're in trouble. We drafted a cease and desist, then a formal eviction notice, and then a lawsuit. $3 million for trespassing, illegal use of private land, damages, and legal fees. The day I delivered the notice, I walked down to the pond, the papers in hand, and found Karen and Marcus waiting. They were there with 2 other HOA board members, measuring something near the waterline, pretending they had any right to be there. Karen turned, her face going pale when she saw the papers. What's this? She snapped. I handed it to her calmly. Your eviction notice. Marcus stepped forward, snatching the papers from her hand, scanning them quickly. His face darkened. This is a joke. I shook my head. No, Marcus, the joke is over. Karen's hands trembled as she read the notice. You can't do this. I looked at her, then at the pond, then back at her. I already did. They tried to intimidate me with fines. They tried to scare me with fake maps. They tried to push me off my land. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know I was ready to fight for this land with everything I had. And now they were the ones trespassing. They were the ones getting evicted. And I wasn't stopping until they were gone, because you don't mess with a Sullivan on his own land. I wish I could tell you they backed down the moment I handed over the eviction notice, that they quietly packed up their cones, took down their HOA park signs, and left. But Karen wasn't built like that, and Marcus, his ego was bigger than the pond he was trying to steal. The day after they got the eviction notice, I saw their cars outside my property again. They were standing by the water, talking fast, pointing at the dock, the picnic tables, the trails weaving through the trees, trying to figure out their next move. I leaned on my fence, arms crossed, watching them with a calm I didn't fully feel. Because underneath it, I was angry. This land had been my father's dream. He saved every penny to buy it, worked 2 jobs, missed holidays, missed sleep, just to keep it. And these people thought they could steal it with paper and lies. I wasn't going to let that happen. I walked down to the pond, boots crunching on the gravel, and they turned when they heard me coming. Karen's face tightened, but she put on that fake smile. Maverick, we need to discuss this. No, Karen, I said, cutting her off. You need to leave. Marcus stepped forward, trying to tower over me, but I didn't flinch. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low, trying to sound threatening. I raised an eyebrow. The only mistake was you thinking you could bully me off my own land. Karen's hands were shaking again, but she tried to hide it by clutching her binder. This is a community resource, she hissed. We've maintained it for years. I let out a dry laugh. On land that isn't yours. Marcus clenched his jaw. We'll fight this. I stepped closer, looking him dead in the eye. Good. I look forward to seeing you in court. They didn't like that. They left, tires spitting gravel as they tore out of the driveway, but I knew this wasn't over. And sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to see 2 sheriff's cars pulling up to the gate. For a moment, my stomach twisted. Even when you know you're in the right, seeing those lights can rattle you. But I straightened my shoulders and walked out to meet them. The deputies were polite, respectful. They asked me to explain what was going on. I showed them the deeds, the surveys, the court documents. One of them, a young deputy with tired eyes, scratched his head. "Maverick, it looks like you're in the clear here." I nodded. "I know. They left without incident, but I could see Karen parked down the road, watching. She was hoping they'd arrest me, hoping to see me dragged off my own land, but instead she watched them shake my hand before leaving, and that was the day I realized how deep her obsession ran, because later that week I got served a lawsuit, filed by the HOA, claiming I was interfering with community resources and demanding I remove all barriers to their access. They were trying to flip the script, trying to make it look like I was the intruder. Lisa, my lawyer, called me as soon as she got the papers. "They're desperate," she said, her voice calm, but with that edge that meant she was ready for war. "They're hoping you'll settle." But I wasn't going to settle. We filed a countersuit, doubling down on the trespassing claims, adding harassment, and including damages for stress, legal fees, and loss of use. It became a standoff. The HOA board, led by Karen and Marcus, started holding emergency meetings, trying to rally the neighborhood against me. They sent out flyers, accusing me of destroying community resources, calling me selfish and unstable. But the thing about lies, they unravel fast when you have the truth. Because neighbors I'd helped over the years started coming to me, shaking their heads, handing me the flyers they found in their mailboxes. They told me stories of Karen's threats, Marcus's intimidation, of how the HOA had fined them for minor things, demanded dues for projects that never got done, how their money vanished into administrative fees. And suddenly, I wasn't the villain in their story. Karen was, Marcus was. The people who had quietly endured their bullying were tired, and they started talking. One by one, neighbors showed up, offering statements, sharing emails, showing me where the HOA had overstepped, overcharged, and overreached. Lisa gathered it all, building a case so solid it was like laying bricks in a wall. Every lie Karen had told, every rule Marcus had twisted, every dollar they'd taken without explanation. It all came out. And with every new piece of evidence, I felt that anger in me transform into something else, resolve, because this wasn't just about my pond anymore. It was about every neighbor they'd bullied, every elderly couple they'd intimidated, every young family they'd drained with fines and threats. It was about stopping them for good. The court date was set, and on the morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse looking up at the building, feeling my dad's presence beside me. "You're doing the right thing, son." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked inside. Karen was there, sitting stiffly in a cheap gray suit, Marcus beside her, looking pale for the first time since I'd met him. They wouldn't look at me. Lisa smiled when she saw me, her briefcase in hand, her eyes sharp and ready. "This is it," she said. I nodded. "Let's finish this." The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even people I didn't recognize stood along the back wall, waiting. Karen and Marcus sat stiffly at their table, flipping through papers, whispering in hushed, frantic tones. Lisa stood beside me, calm and focused, her presence like steel. When the judge walked in, the room fell silent. This was it. All the months of harassment, the fines, the threats, the fake maps, the intimidation. It all led to this moment. The judge opened the session, glancing through the case files, then looking over the rim of her glasses at Karen and Marcus. "Let's begin." Their lawyer went first, launching into a speech about community rights, preserving neighborhood resources, and how my actions were harmful to the collective good. Karen nodded along, lips tight, her eyes darting to the crowd. Marcus just stared straight ahead, jaw clenching with every sentence. But when it was our turn, Lisa stood slowly, placing her hands on the table, and began to speak with calm power. She laid out the facts. The surveys proving my ownership. The documents showing the HOA had been using my land illegally for years. The The harassment, the false fines, the fake maps, the statements from neighbors, the photos, the receipts, the records. One by one, each piece of evidence stacked up like bricks, forming a wall so solid even Karen's lawyer started shifting uncomfortably. When Lisa finished, the judge sat quietly for a moment, flipping through the documents, the silence heavy in the room. Then she looked at Karen. Ms. Harding, did your HOA conduct an official survey of these boundaries before building amenities on Mr. Sullivan's land? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, her face paling. Marcus swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. Karen finally muttered. And are you aware that these structures are on private property you do not own? Karen's eyes darted around the room, looking for someone, anyone, to save her. Yes, she whispered. The judge nodded slowly. Then she looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, you have every right to your property, and it is clear the HOA has overstepped its authority. Karen's shoulders slumped, and Marcus's head dropped. But the judge wasn't done. She began listing the damages, the trespassing, the unauthorized use, the emotional distress, the legal fees. It all added up. And when she announced the judgment, the room went silent again. The HOA was ordered to pay me $2, $7 million in damages and legal fees. They were ordered to remove all structures from my property immediately, and a restraining order was issued, preventing Karen, Marcus, and any HOA representative from stepping onto my land again. Karen's face turned white, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to form words. Marcus just stared at the table, defeated. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me relief. Justice, the weight of my father's dream being protected, secured. Lisa squeezed my shoulder, a small, satisfied smile on her face. It's over, Maverick, she said, and it was. When we stepped out of that courthouse, the sun was bright, the air fresh, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. Neighbors were waiting, clapping me on the back, shaking my hand, thanking me for standing up. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the entire neighborhood, about every person who had been bullied by Karen and Marcus and their misuse of power. A few days later, I walked down to the pond, the place where it all started. The grill was still there, waiting. I fired it up, letting the smell of smoke and spice fill the air, the flames crackling softly in the breeze. I sat down in my dad's old chair, looking out over the water, feeling his presence beside me. You did it, son. I could almost hear him say it. Karen and Marcus tried to take what my father worked for, what I worked for. But they failed. They underestimated the power of the truth, the strength of someone who refused to be bullied, the resolve of a man honoring his family's legacy. And in the end, their greed cost them everything. Their money, their positions, their power. Because the thing about people like Karen and Marcus, they think they're untouchable, that the rules don't apply to them, that they can take and take and take. Until someone finally stands up and says enough. And when that happens, they crumble, they fall apart, because their power was never real. It was built on fear, on intimidation, on lies. And when you take that away, there's nothing left. I looked out over the pond, the water reflecting the blue sky, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the birds calling overhead. This was home. This was worth fighting for, and I would do it again 100 times over. Because no HOA, no Karen, no Marcus would ever take this from me. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the sun soak into my skin, the sounds of the pond washing over me, and I smiled. Because in the end, the land stayed in the family. The truth won, and justice was served.